Hello and welcome to For Every Response, the podcast from Emergency Services Times, sponsored by MSA Safety. I'm Catherine Levin and I'm the editor of Emergency Services Times. For this episode, Lanna talks to Alex Woodman. He's the Chief Fire Officer for Hertfordshire Fire and Rescue Service. Lanna had met Alex at an event earlier this year and he agreed to join the pod to chat about his career and his views on leadership. Unlike many in the Fire and Rescue Service, Alex hasn't come up through the ranks to be a chief. He's come from a police and local government background. Although we're starting to see more chief fire officers without a fire background, think about South Wales with their chief with an RAF leadership background, and Buckinghamshire and Northamptonshire both having former police officers in the leadership role now. It's interesting then that Alex uses the term trust and confidence a few times in this interview. It's language we hear more in police, but increasingly in fire. And I think that's because in fire we talk more about culture now. And in this interview, Alex talks about people, about dignity, and about doing the small things well. I had a look at the HMIC, they're the Inspectorate for Police and Fire, one of their reports into Hertfordshire Fire and Rescue Service published earlier this year, and it said that their culture and values were judged as adequate. It said there was a positive working culture throughout the service, and he and Lanna talk about aspects of that. I'm taken by the fact that he uses the term imposter syndrome. I've heard that from leaders before in the emergency services, but it's usually women. He also chairs the local resilience forum, and I'd love to get into more on that, especially as we move closer to the national pandemic exercise. But I did wonder that if you have a fire chief doing this with a non-fire background, so with police and with local government, then perhaps that's the ideal chair. But maybe that's for another pod episode. So for now, sit back and enjoy this episode with Lanna and Alex.
So today I'm delighted to be joined by Alex Woodman, Chief Fire Officer of the Hertfordshire Fire and Rescue Service. Welcome, Alex.
Good afternoon.
So Alex has had quite an interesting journey through the public sector, starting out as an officer within the Metropolitan Police and then moving into some more senior roles in local government and now leading a fire and rescue service. And I think that kind of sort of cross-sector leadership is still quite rare. So today we're going to look at what that experience brings to the fire sector and how the service is evolving under Alex's leadership. So, Alex, you've had a career that spans policing, local government, and now the fire and rescue service. So, what sort of thread connects those stages of your career, and what would you say sort of drew you to fire?
So I think the thread across all of them is communities, people, protecting the public. That's always been something that's a big driver for me. I think if you speak to anyone who works in public service or the public sector, you get a real pleasure and satisfaction from serving those communities that you work for. And sometimes it can sound a bit cliche or a bit, cringy, but actually that's what a lot of people in the public service do. They don't join for the pain or the plaudits. They join for the responsibility of the roles and actually looking after people and serving communities. So I think if there's a thread all the way through the different roles that I've done across different public service organisations, it's got to be about the communities that we all serve and that we are here to look after.
Very important. And when you took on this Chief Fire Officer role, what was that sort of transition like? Obviously, you previously had a career in the Met and then you've moved more into local government. So then stepping back into the emergency services must have been quite interesting.
I mean, it was. I think, look, whenever you take on a new role, whenever you move to a new job, there's always the apprehension of that new role. But actually coming across into fire, it was probably one of the easiest moves that I've ever had in different roles, because I think one of the biggest, strongest points is around the culture, the people, the acceptance, the move into National Fire Chiefs Council, made it really, really easy to do. And I think any of those initial nerves or anxieties you have, how are you going to be welcomed? How are you going to be received? Actually shifting sectors, what will people's opinions be? I've had pretty seamless a journey moving into fire. And as I said, it's whether that's people within Hertfordshire Fire and Rescue, whether that's people within Hertfordshire County Council, colleagues there, or across National Fire Chiefs and other fire and rescue services, the people couldn't have been more accommodating, supporting, all of the things you want when you come in and take on an organisation. So for me, any of those initial thoughts or anxieties were very quickly gone at the point you start coming into the business.
And have you found it a challenge at all, sort of getting fire seen at this sort of county level? Obviously, you're part of the council as well. So has that been a challenge at all?
So we've got a governance arrangement here in Hertfordshire. There's 12 current fire services that sit within a county council governance model. So there's a lot happening nationally at the minute, local government reform, devolution, all this conversation. But basically what that means is that there are a number of governance models for fire services. I sit as part of the county council leadership team. So Hertfordshire Fire and Rescue is an entity that sits under the governance arrangements of Hertfordshire County Council. For the purposes they constitute the fire authority. It's a mixed role. So I've got a wider remit. So yes, I'm the Chief Fire Officer, but I'm also an Executive Director for the County Council. So I'm responsible for the Community Protection Directorate. So that brings together public health, trading standards, our regulatory services teams, what we have as our strategic migration teams, but I also lead on resilience for the county. And then as a hat on behalf of all of the agencies in Hertfordshire, I chair the local resilience forum as well. So a mixed and broad role. So yes, slightly different to some of the other chief fire officers that are responsible for standalone organisations. I've got a portfolio that spans into public health, trading standards, regulatory services, resilience, and those types of areas. So is it challenges? I think there's challenges in every role with governance that you do. You know, there is you can ask me every day of the week. There's pros, there's cons, there's opportunities, there's risks. I think it's more importantly about the relationship that you have with your elected leaders and the role that the fire and rescue service plays in bringing that to life, explaining the value of what we do, understanding the role that the fire and rescue service plays in the community. Actually, that's the priority of making sure that we've got that understanding. And you want that level of oversight and scrutiny coming in, because that level of engagement from elected members is crucial. But at the same time, I have the benefit of working in a round table with colleagues from adult social care, from children's services, from growth and environment. So it's a lot easier to work with colleagues when you're sitting around the same table as part of one organisation to get things done. But there are challenges, because at times when it comes to decisions around budgets and other areas, you are competing against other significant demands that are being managed. So sometimes when your budgets are looked at in isolation, actually that can put a different pressure on. So I think there are pros to it. As I said, the relationships that we've got across colleagues, across those other directorates is really important, but there can be challenges when certain decisions are made about how you manage the effective budgets that are used in Hertfordshire, but that doesn't take away from what we achieve as a fire and rescue service.
Okay. And so fire and rescue services have quite strong traditions and long serving teams. How did you sort of approach stepping into this leadership role where many colleagues have built their sort of entire careers within the service?
So I think that anybody that goes into a leadership role, one of the first and most important things I think you have to do is learn and understand that organisation. And I think whether you move from local government, different local authorities have slightly different ways of working. They can have significant traditions and history. Other organisations do. And I think anybody who moves in a leadership role, it's naive to not come in and want to learn about that organisation. You need to build the trust and relationships with your colleagues. Actually, I've found it there is a really nice thing through the fire service. I've heard a lot of people talk about a family theme that runs through the fire service, and I think that is a really strong culture that there is. You know, people working with each other, supporting each other, really, really strong team dynamics. And I think that's probably something that comes from a really strong watch culture. And I think it's quite interesting because when people talk about culture, yes, the fire service has been in the media the last couple of years, I think for the right reason, calling out poor behaviours and headlines that we all know are shocking. And I think it's quite right that we're dealing with that and calling that out. But at the same time, what I don't want to lose sight of is the levels of positivity that there are within the organisation. Because yes, we have seen people exit organisations that shouldn't have been here in the first place. And that's absolutely right to do. But what I want to focus on is around the wider organisation, the really good quality people that we've got, the strong relationships across what makes up the fire and rescue service. And it's not just about the fire engines. Of course, that's a crucial part of the business. But we've got roles right across fire protection, our fire control operators, our prevention services, the training units that we've got. There are many people that make up a fire and rescue service. It's not just about one part of the business that tends to get, understandably, quite a lot of airtime. And I think that's what is really strong about, there are really positive cultures within the fire and rescue service, and a lot of people who turn up to work every day to want to go out and look after their communities.
Mm. And did you feel, though, at any point that you sort of had to prove yourself in a way that maybe an internally promoted CFO might not have?
I think it's prove, not sure. I think it's probably more the fact that actually what I wanted to do was to demonstrate to the business that I was listening and understanding and wanted to learn the skills and understand the requirements of my role. So I'm not sure if prove is the word I would use, but I think there's always an element that you get imposter syndrome. I think most people, if they're being honest, when they move through leadership roles, there's always a time or a role that you take on. Perhaps the first time someone becomes a chief executive, and you are the number one. There's an element of, have I got the skills to do this? Do I know what I'm doing? And I think there's absolutely no doubt that when I came into this role, of course you do. And if I sat here and went, oh no, absolutely not, I'd be lying. The reality is there is always things that you want to learn, you want to understand. And I think, I would say probably, if you spoke to most chief fire officers that have come through their organisations or moved up from being I think they would say, well, we've learned at every role in the organisation. I think anybody that's taken on the chief fire officer's role would go, do you know what? There's always learning. There's always an element of demonstrating your value and your worth. So I think that's just a natural leadership challenge that wherever you go, I don't think it's a blocker, and I don't think I've come across anything that I've found is not achievable or doable, but it's about having the healthy respect and understanding of the role that you play and the role that you play within the organisation. And as I said, you'll probably hear me say it along the way through, it doesn't matter what organisation you're in, you have to build the trust and confidence of the people that you work with. And I think you have to have people at one of the central points of what you do in an organisation. It has to be your focus as the leader of that business.
Yeah, it all comes back to people, doesn't it? So it's been 4 years since you stepped into the role. So I'm sure a lot has changed, in the sector and likely within the service as well. What were your sort of initial priorities for the service, and how would you say those sort of priorities have perhaps evolved over time?
So I think there's a number of sort of phases that we've gone through. I think one of the areas that I really wanted to focus on, and something that really did stand out to me when I first sort of started to get to know the understanding that the fire and rescue side of my portfolio, was I think around dignity in the workplace. And I've really picked up on this a lot, because something that I was really disappointed in that I found when I joined here, and this is no fault of the people that were working in the organisation, this is a bigger issue that I think needed to be called out, was the fact that our workplaces did not meet the minimum standards that I would expect them to for colleagues that work in them. And I'll give you, some examples of things that I found that I was genuinely surprised, shocked to find when I started working in the organisation. So things like open plan dormitories, open plan shower facilities, just not appropriate for modern workplaces. And what I found was that, and again, this is where you get a really good culture of the fire service, people wanting to do right things, problem solving, going forward, adapting, overcome, and all of these things I hear. Brilliant. Really, really things that I want to celebrate in the organisation. But what I found was that they weren't looking after themselves when they were coming back to the fire stations. So the standards that they would expect on a fire ground, the standards that would be expected of a fire engine, I'd go into their workplaces where they were sitting on tatty old chairs, living and sleeping in an environment that was substandard in open plan living. But because of that culture of, well, no, we've got to do the best, we need to make do, our role is to go out and go forward and look after the community, I don't think there was a culture where people were saying, actually, this is not right. This is not appropriate. Actually, I do want privacy. I do want dignity. And I think it's one of those areas where we need to understand the role that parts of the fire service play, which is, to live, sleep and work at those fire stations, to be ready to go out to deal with some of the most horrific things that people may be asked to do. And I wasn't happy with the environments that people were working in. And that to me was a big point about how we treat our people. And that's the flow for me about what was the priority. Well, actually, what I wanted to make sure is that our people are at the centre of our business. What we do, the decisions we make, the way that we operate as an organisation, even down to some elements of, some of the PPE that we were using wasn't the right size and shape to fit everybody. And it wasn't about male, female, it just didn't fit. If you didn't have size 11 feet and your body shape didn't flow from there, sometimes some of the things that we had didn't fit you because of perceived budgetary constraints. Well, actually, that's wrong. That's not the culture that I want. What I want to make sure is that we're putting people at the centre of all of our decisions, whether that's the way that we recruit, the way that we retain, the way that we implement policy. And I think there were some really, obvious examples to me where I don't think we'd got it right about putting people at the centre of our decision making.
Oh, so some quite basic but really important things there then. Have you noticed or sort of had any sort of staff feedback from that then, trying to implement that change since?
So we've had some really detailed conversations with colleagues across all parts of the business. And I think what's been really important is to get that mixture of views, opinions, feedback. I think some of the conversation I was having, I think some colleagues would really openly say to Alex, I didn't see that, I didn't think that. But now we've started to make changes. So some of our fire stations have already come online with our individual sleeping facilities, individual showers. I think people are now looking back and going, actually, you've got a point. We were so used to seeing things in a certain way that actually now we're looking at it. No, you're right. That isn't right. So other areas I think where people were concerned is that, we had some really lengthy debates with colleagues around sort of locker room facilities. And they'd say to me, we're really concerned that if you put individual locker rooms in and private, actually we're going to lose some of the relationship management, some of the well, I'm confident that hasn't happened. And what we've seen is an evolution that people have gone, oh, no, you're right. We're working in a better, dignified environment. We're meeting in other ways. We're doing things in different ways. So I think there's always, I think there's probably a bit of a history of an apprehension of trust and confidence in the leadership teams, maybe in fire. And I think a lot of organisations, do we trust the leadership team to be making the right decisions for the right reasons? And I think that trust and confidence is sometimes lacking across lots of organisations. What I was keen to do was to demonstrate to people that we're making decisions for the right reasons. We are transparent. We are open. We want, feedback. That was something I did notice when I came in here, is that people were quite cautious about giving feedback because they hadn't had the best experiences previously. That when they were having views and opinions, and I keep saying, I've never been to a bad meeting since I've been in the fire service. I've never been to a bad watch. I've met some colleagues who are very passionate. I've met some colleagues who have some really clear views and opinions. No problem with that. But I just think sometimes that openness to hear views and opinions wasn't where I would have wanted it to be. So, to me, it's back to that point. If you focus around people, the systems, your processes, the ways of working flow from there, because people are at the heart of what we do. If you don't have them, we can't do the role. You can have the best policies in the world. You can have the glossiest website in the world. But if you haven't got that relationship with the people you work with, and you haven't got a good set of cultures, values, and behaviours, you're struggling.
That's really interesting. So with that sort of cultural shift that we've kind of been talking about already, how would you describe that shift within the service over the past few years? Do you feel like it has changed a lot under your leadership?
I'm always cautious around words like a lot, because everything is frustratingly slow. Nothing is ever quick enough as you want to do it. All of your best ideas and intentions that you've got never come to fruition at the pace you want them to. What I'd hope is that if you spoke to people across Hertfordshire Fire and Rescue, the theme that you would get is to say, yeah, okay, things are moving. We can see the dialogue, we can see the conversation. Actually, we can see some physical changes. Yes, we're getting clarity on that. So I would never go as far as to say, oh yeah, everything's right, everything's great, everything's where it should be, because I think that's just naive. But what I would like is to hope that people would go, do you know what? We are building trust, we're building confidence, we can see the direction of the organisation. Actually, we can see the groundwork of what's being put in place. And I think that's probably a big part for me, is that for as long as I'm in this role, what I'm really keen to do is to structure and build this part of the business in a way that whomever comes in after me can go, I can see what Alex was doing, I can see the direction, I can see the mindset. Clearly, if that person wants to do something, that's within their gift to do so. But what I hope is that we've built and structured an organisation and a business that can constantly evolve and adapt and build from, rather than it, needing to be restructured or looked at. So a lot of what I'm focused on is doing the small things well, getting the nuts and bolts right in the organisation, but really building that strength of trust and culture in the organisation.
This episode of the Emergency Services Times podcast is sponsored by MSA Safety, proudly supporting emergency services and first responders on the front line. At MSA Safety, protecting first responders isn't just what we do, it's who we are. We work closely with fire and rescue services across the UK to develop and deliver safety solutions designed to meet your ever-evolving needs. That includes MSA Bristol Firefighter PPE, trusted by services across the UK and beyond, shaped through years of collaboration with frontline teams. It also includes our growing investment in innovation and technology, from the connected M1 SCBA modular solution to our agile, fully managed service model that helps keep crews protected and ready to respond. But for us, safety goes beyond equipment. We believe in standing shoulder to shoulder with the people who dedicate their lives to protecting others, whether it's supporting firefighter charities, backing mental health initiatives, or showing up for community events. MSA is proud to be part of the emergency services family. To learn more about our work in the UK and how we're supporting first responders every step of the way, visit www.msasafety.com. With MSA Safety, when you go in, we go in with you.
So 4 years on, what do you sort of see as the biggest operational challenges that you guys are facing today?
So I think there's probably two areas, I suppose. Operational challenges, I think there is a real demand on the fire service. I think the fire service, whilst statistically the fire service may not be responding to certain historic traditional fire scenarios as much, I think the evolution of the role is happening. I think 18 months ago, who would have thought we'd be reporting on wildfires in the way that we were across the UK? 40-degree temperatures, and as much as I think sometimes people, there's a lot of discussion around climate change and what it really means. I think most people would notice that there has been a change in the environment that we're operating in. 40-degree temperatures across that period of time was a significant shift in UK weather. And we saw wildfires across many areas of the country, and the deployment of firefighters, fire control, all parts of the business were absolutely on demand. So I think one of the roles for the fire service is changing to the ever-demanding environment. I think there is far more things, it's Water Safety Awareness Week recently, the role that the fire service plays in responding to people in road traffic collisions. There is a big demand there where we're looking at shifting sectors where we know the challenge that our colleagues are under in the NHS. We know the demand on acutes. We know the impact on ambulance services, we are seeing an ever increasing demand for our services to go and assist other agencies, which is predominantly through the ambulance service. So I think we've got to be alive to the fact that the asks that are being put on the fire and rescue service is a different demand now and an evolving demand, whilst in the same vein making sure that we are suitably prepared to respond to fires of the scale and complexity that we do see at times. I think on the other point, so you asked me operationally, but I think the other challenges that we see are similar fact to any public sector organisation. We are operating in a very tight financial window. There is no spare money anywhere anymore. I think what we are looking and being alive to is to make sure that we are not seeing cost shunting across agencies. I think we need to make sure that our role as the fire and rescue service is really clear and defined for what we are being asked to do. But I think that in turn would create opportunities as well. And I think there are opportunities for the fire service going forward. But I think we are operating in an environment that any public service leader would tell you is to say that we're operating with very tight financial windows in an ever increasing demand service. And the public quite rightly expect that service to be exemplary whenever they call on it.
Okay, quite the challenge you have then. So finally, what would you sort of say is you in a sort of leadership role, but also as the service as a whole? Are there any particular areas that you guys are sort of focused on developing or maybe kind of exploring next in your leadership?
I mean, I think sort of locally for Hertfordshire, one of the big pushes are we've just recently relaunched our new community risk management plan. As people in the sector will know, that's a really crucial document for any fire and rescue service. One of the big things for us as a leadership team is genuinely bringing that alive to make sure that the organisation is clearly structured around the way that we respond to risk, the way that we structure as an organisation, the way that we spend money effectively and efficiently. We've had a challenging HMI report recently come in. I don't want to shy away from that, but there were areas where they told me that I need to focus on and parts of the business they want to see done differently. That's an important relationship for us. And I want to make sure, the fire and rescue service in Hertfordshire is one that the public rightly deserve, and the organisation is one that the people who work in it deserve. So I want to make sure that our community risk management plan is genuinely a core driving strategy that we can underpin the delivery of the business behind, so that we've got real clarity on what we spend and why we do what we do. And that's a really important, as I said at the stage, doing the simple things well is giving that clarity to the business around what we are doing, what we are looking to achieve, and how we want to operate as an organisation.
And one of my favourite bits of the podcast is when we ask advice for listeners. So do you have any advice that you would give to someone who's perhaps looking to step into leadership within the emergency services, particularly if they are coming from a sort of different background like you did?
Do it. I think the reality is that the words, it's an emergency service, of course it's different, but every organisation is different. If people want to move into leadership roles, the most important thing is that we have the right people coming forward and the right people wanting to take on those leadership roles. So I often talk to people when, they're coming through promotion. There's often people, I wish I'd done this sooner, or but what I also think when it comes to things like promotion and leadership roles, what we don't want to do is take away from the fact that actually we also want to celebrate people that don't want to be promoted. It's not all just about joining an organisation and having to be promoted. So what I want to make sure is that actually we celebrate everyone in the roles that they want to play. I want to make sure that we've got really clear pathways for people to come forward. And I think in turn, actually, I think it's really healthy, people moving around leadership roles in different organisations. It's important that we have clear job descriptions and role maps for people moving across. And this is some work that we've been doing on that. But I don't think it's unhealthy, people moving around sectors, spreading knowledge, spreading information. But the other important thing that we shouldn't lose sight of is actually it's important that people can come through their organisations as well, because what you want is a mixture of people and a mixture of skills and experience and knowledge. And I think we don't want to just go down a path of saying, oh no, we'll bring people in. We want to make sure that if people join the fire and rescue service, whether they're joining as firefighters, fire control operators, into protection, you want to see a route path for people where they can move through an organisation and actually achieve senior roles and opportunities. There's a number of programs, there are direct entry schemes, development opportunities and pathways. Some of them not as explored as we want them to be, but I think it's important that we're having those conversations and we're looking at them. But I think you need a balance of both. It's not just about bringing people in from the outside to do that. We don't want to get in a fashionable trend where that's just suddenly what we're doing all the time, because then you lose people internally within the organisation. But in the same vein, what we don't want to be is so protectionist where, you can only ever achieve a chief something role or a lead role because you've got to work your way through the organisation. And I think areas, I think it's, policing and other areas, it's something that I think, would be considered, looked at. Look across local government chief executives, the portfolios and responsibilities that they hold. There is no current chief executive that's done every role in every organisation and responsible for every bit. Very successful, experienced leaders. And I think that's why it's important to separate out what are the skill sets and responsibilities that you have within your role. What you did 25 years ago may be slightly different, but it's about making sure that we've got the right level of training, support, and things like the job descriptions and the role maps for people. But you want to have that healthy balance between the two. So my advice to people is explore, talk, come and talk to people in the roles. I'm always open to chat to anyone about my career path and where I've come forward through. Please contact me if anyone wants to chat with me. There are many people in the sector who've come in from different backgrounds and different roles. But like I said at the start, do it. If you are interested and you want to do it, put your hat in the ring, ask the questions, go for the processes. And I think those who go and do it will be pleasantly surprised at the roles and the relationships and the way that you will be. If it's within the fire sector, I have no doubt of the way that you'll be received. And as I said, you'll have those initial anxieties, but they will quickly go once you come in and join and you become part of National Fire Chiefs Council or your home service, because you will see the culture and the relationships that you'll build and develop.
Well, that is some great piece of advice to end on then. Thank you so much for joining me, Alex. It's been really, really interesting to hear your experience across policing, local government, and then how now the fire service is shaping your approach to leadership. I do think that kind of perspective is very valuable, as services are obviously under a lot of pressure to adapt and collaborate in new ways. So there's obviously still quite a lot evolving at your service, but also a sort of real sense of, I think, direction and purpose of where things are heading. So thank you so much again for joining me, Alex.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening, and thanks to Tom St. John for expertly producing this episode. If you like this episode, then be sure to check out other conversations with leaders in this season of For Every Response, sponsored by MSA Safety. Share the link and subscribe to receive updates on new episodes from us here at Emergency Services Times.